In the entire history of Hollywood racing films, exactly 5 made before the year 2000 earned the approval of actual racing drivers, the people who know what it genuinely feels like when a car is doing something real versus something manufactured for a camera. 5 films where the circuits weren't dressed sets, the cars weren't props, and the danger wasn't choreographed. Hollywood has spent decades chasing that feeling, and most of the time it comes up short. But 5 times, across 5 decades, it didn't. And the stories behind how each production pulled it off are stranger and more compelling than anything the writers put on the page. Claude Lelouch shot this film in 1966 on almost no money, with available light, a skeleton crew, and actors who improvised chunks of their own dialogue because a full script wasn't always within budget. The Ford Mustang Coupe that Jean-Louis Trintignant drives through the film arrives on screen without ceremony. Not hero-lit, not dressed up for the camera, just a car that a man uses to drive across France to see a woman, which turns out to be exactly the right approach. Trintignant plays a widowed racing driver, and Lelouch didn't hire a stunt double or a professional to replace him in the driving sequences. What he did instead was cut real race footage from the 24 Hours of Le Mans and the Monte Carlo rally around Trintignant's face. And the result is something no studio development process would ever approve. It feels authentic because most of it is. Lelouch had this instinct consistently, and it showed up again a decade later in C'était un rendezvous, his legendary 1976 short film capturing a dawn run through Paris at speed, which became another touchstone for anyone serious about automotive cinema. A Man and a Woman won the Palme d'Or at Cannes and took the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. It is the quietest entry on this list, and it might be the most honest. Cinema Verite and Motorsport, it turns out, were a natural pairing, and nobody thought to tell Lelouch that until he'd already proved it. Henry Hathaway directed Kirk Douglas in a Formula One drama in 1955, and what separates it from every other racing film of that era comes down to 2 names. Phil Hill, who would become America's first Formula One world champion 6 years later in 1961, and John Fitch, one of the most respected sports car racers of his generation. Hathaway brought both men on not as stunt drivers, but as technical advisors, and their influence runs through every sequence where a car actually behaves like a racing car and a driver actually holds a wheel like a driver. You'd expect a studio production from 1955 to point cameras at cars circling a track and consider the job done, but Hathaway developed a rear projection technique that incorporated overhead angles, which represented a genuine step forward in how racing could be framed cinematically. The spatial accuracy it produced was something most directors of the period weren't even attempting. The Racers isn't a flashy film, and it doesn't need to be, because its seriousness of purpose is its entire point. What's worth understanding is the chain of influence running forward from this production. The bigger budget racing films of the 1960s built directly on the technical foundations Hathaway laid here, and without Grand Prix, Le Mans almost certainly takes a different shape. Every era of realistic racing cinema has a forgotten foundation. For this particular tradition, The Racers is it. Winning started life as a television movie, a modest, low-budget project about a racing driver chasing the Indianapolis 500. And it would have stayed that way if Paul Newman hadn't heard about it. Newman had recently discovered that he was genuinely fast behind the wheel, not in the celebrity at a track sense, but in the competitive, results on a timing sheet sense. And he pushed the project up to a full theatrical feature with real Indianapolis Motor Speedway access, real drivers including Bobby Unser and Dan Gurney, and race footage pulled from actual events. The 11-car crash embedded in the film's racing sequences came from the 1966 Indy 500, and it is still uncomfortable to watch, which is the whole point. No crew member staged it, no stuntman caused it. It happened during a real race, and cameras were there to capture it. The pit lane sequences were filmed at the actual speedway during the 1968 event, and Newman wasn't doubling for anyone. He was developing the skills that would eventually earn him a legitimate Sports Car Club of America national championship. The studio found this nerve-wracking. Newman found it non-negotiable. I find this one genuinely moving, because it's essentially the origin story of Paul Newman, the racing driver, told through a film about a fictional racing driver, which is a level of life-imitating art that you couldn't write intentionally. What nobody planned, and what only became clear decades later, is that Winning also preserved a detailed visual record of the old gasoline alley garages at Indianapolis Motor Speedway, structures that were torn down after the 1985 race. The production never intended to document anything. It just happened to be there with cameras running at the right moment in history. John Frankenheimer deployed 52 cameras across multiple European circuits during the actual 1966 Formula One season, using helicopters, camera cars running at genuine racing speed, and some of the earliest in-car mounted photography ever used in a theatrical production. The editing team then spent months synchronizing over 1 million feet of raw footage, work that earned the film 3 Academy Awards at the 39th ceremony, including Best Film Editing. 1 million feet of footage. That figure still lands differently every time. The film stars James Garner, and here's the thing most people don't know. That role was originally Steve McQueen's to lose, and he lost it. McQueen's first meeting with producer Edward Lewis went badly enough that he didn't get the part, and McQueen reportedly declined to speak to his neighbor James Garner, who took the role for approximately 4 years afterward. Garner did the work, the film is excellent, and McQueen went off to develop what would become Le Mans, the most realistic and most financially troubled racing film Hollywood ever produced. The territorial dispute between the two productions even extended to Nürburgring footage, with Frankenheimer eventually handing over 27 reels of material to McQueen's team. In Hollywood, creative conflicts usually leave a paper trail. This one had a real count. The onboard camera techniques Frankenheimer developed for Grand Prix effectively invented the visual language that every Formula One broadcast now uses as standard. Watch modern F1 television coverage, and you are watching a direct descendant of the decisions this production made in 1966, which is not an exaggeration but simply a fact about how one film changed what audiences expect speed to look like. And then there's Jackie Stewart. During the 1966 Belgian Grand Prix at Spa, while Frankenheimer's crew was filming nearby, Stewart crashed heavily and spent 25 minutes trapped in his car, submerged in fuel, with no fire extinguisher anywhere close to him. That incident launched his decades-long campaign for motorsport safety reform. Grand Prix wasn't trying to document a turning point in the sport's relationship with danger. It just happened to be present when that turning point arrived. The most realistic racing film ever committed to celluloid came within a conversation of having no script at all, and that was entirely intentional. Steve McQueen's executive producer described the situation with admirable clarity. They had the star, the drivers, and an extraordinary technical operation, and they had absolutely no script. McQueen considered this a reasonable place to begin. At the center of Le Mans sits the Porsche 917K Chassis 022, and calling it a car undersells what it actually is. The 917K runs a matching numbers Type 912 flat 12 engine displacing 4,494 cubic centimeters, delivering around 580 horsepower through a 4-speed all-synchromesh transaxle, all packaged into a car weighing approximately 800 kilograms. That's violence in fiberglass, painted in Gulf Oil's blue and orange livery and wearing number 20 for the film, a color combination so visually specific that scale model manufacturers still struggle to keep it in stock more than 50 years later. The Porsche 917K Chassis 022 isn't just a prop from a famous film. It's one of the most recognizable racing cars ever built, and the two facts are inseparable. McQueen's Solar Productions entered a camera car in the actual 1970 Le Mans race, a Porsche 908/2 that was McQueen's own vehicle, fitted with 3 cameras and crewed by Herbert Ling and Jonathan Williams. The car completed 282 laps and covered 3,798 kilometers before finishing 9th on the road, though it wasn't officially classified because pit stops to change film reels meant it failed to cover the required minimum distance under race regulations. A production company entered a racing car in the 24 Hours of Le Mans to collect footage, and it nearly finished in the top 10. The insurance company refused to let McQueen drive it competitively, which was probably the right call, and which McQueen found absolutely maddening. Here's where the hidden story lives. McQueen's original concept involved actually racing in the 1970 Le Mans, alongside Formula One world champion Jackie Stewart, using the footage as the entire film. No actors, no script, just 2 men competing in the world's greatest endurance race with cameras mounted to everything in reach. The financiers shut it down. What McQueen proposed in 1970 is essentially what streaming platforms now spend extraordinary sums producing as premium motorsport documentary content, and the industry told him no because it was too strange and too risky and didn't fit any recognizable template. He was 50 years early. For the major crash sequences, the production constructed a disguised Lola T70 fitted with Porsche bodywork to stand in for the Porsche 917K Chassis 022, which was too irreplaceable to destroy. During one of those sequences, the throttle stuck at full open, And what ended up on screen is a real accident that happened to a real car traveling at genuinely dangerous speed. The crew kept the footage because nothing they could have staged would have looked as true. Filming extended so far past its original schedule that the production ran from June through to November 1970, and there are scenes set during the warmth of the June race where you can clearly see breath condensing in the cold November air. Nobody caught it before release, or nobody cared enough to address it. I'm honestly slightly in awe of this production, not because it was well managed, but because it was completely obsessive in a way that competent management would have prevented. Director John Sturges arrived with ambitions for a conventional dramatic film, and departed after McQueen refused every script containing substantial dialogue or narrative structure. Lee H. Katzin replaced Sturges and finished the picture. The New York Times called the racing sequences dazzling and the drama tepid, and both assessments are accurate because the drama is thin by design. McQueen didn't want drama. He wanted the Porsche 917K and the circuit and the noise and the rain, and the particular kind of fear that professional endurance racing produces. That's what he put on screen. The Porsche 917K chassis 022 was purchased by racing driver Brian Redman in 1975 for $15,000 in nominal 1975 money, passed through several collections over the following decades, and was eventually acquired by Jerry Seinfeld, who commissioned a full restoration completed in August 2024, returning the car to its filming-era Gulf Porsche team livery, with the frame painted back to its original black finish. In January 2025, Mecum Auctions facilitated a transaction involving chassis 022, and the final sale price was not publicly disclosed. What a car chooses not to reveal about its own value is sometimes the most interesting thing about it. One more thing about the timing. 1970 was the first year Porsche took overall victory at Le Mans outright, and McQueen's cameras were present for it. He didn't set out to document a historic moment in motorsport. He simply understood that Le Mans was the only place in the world where the thing he wanted to film actually existed, and he went there and filmed it. The production lost money. No studio-released budget figure has been independently corroborated from two sources, and no reliable total gross has been confirmed the same way. So those numbers stay off this list. What the record does show clearly is that Le Mans didn't recoup its costs in theatrical release, and McQueen's company absorbed substantial losses as a result. The film then became one of the most studied and visually influential pieces of motorsport cinema ever produced. That's the pattern that connects every film on this list. What runs through all 5 of these productions is a single decision that each team had to make somewhere early in the process. Do we simulate the speed, or do we go find it? Studio instinct almost always points toward simulation, toward control, toward the version that keeps the insurance premiums manageable. The filmmakers who built something lasting almost always went the other direction. Real circuits, real cars, real drivers, real consequences. The results are imperfect, sometimes financially damaging, occasionally genuinely dangerous, and cinematically irreplaceable. Because no budget in the world buys what chassis 022 sounds like at full throttle, through the Porsche curves at 10 in the morning during the actual 24 hours of Le Mans. McQueen understood that. Every production on this list understood it, each in their own way, and that shared understanding is exactly what makes them worth watching half a century on. If the gap between what Hollywood wanted these films to be and what the people making them actually built is the kind of story that pulls you in, this channel is where those stories get told.